Good evening and welcome to the council budget meeting for Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. At this time, may we all rise for the playing of O Canada. All right, please be seated. For those at home, I believe you heard a rendition of O Canada. For those of us here in the chambers, the audio was not working, so I am making an assumption on that point, and if that did not occur, my apologies. At this time, we'll begin our meeting today by taking time to acknowledge that the land on which we live and gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. Over the last several months, we as a community have tried to come to grips with the genocide that was perpetrated on the peoples that are Indigenous to Canada by our federal government. While these lands are covered by multiple treaties between the Crown and those nations, those treaties have long been violated, if not completely ignored. These territories where we live and work are covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This was a treaty originally agreed to by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and Mississauga peoples, and European settlers were brought into the agreement through the Treaty of Niagara. The purpose of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement is to ensure we all recognize the fact that we all have a responsibility to ensure the Dish, the territories on which we live and work, is never emptied, and that we take care of the land and its inhabitants in a way that ensures its future sustainability. So good evening all. We will begin now. I'll start with the chair's report. Not a long report this evening. Simply to note that tonight we do have in front of us the draft operating and draft capital budgets. I would like to strongly recommend to all of our friends and neighbors within the community. We do have public consultations coming up next week with virtual open houses and the telephone town hall on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week. You can visit stcatharines.ca/budget for more information. I want to make sure I got that correct. stcatharines.ca/budget for information on how to register to ensure that you are a part of the telephone town hall if you so wish, or either of the virtual town halls on Monday and Wednesday night. The telephone town hall will take place next Tuesday, which would be the 26th at 7 p.m. I'm just looking to make sure I don't get any of that information incorrect. With that, though, it's important to note there are a variety of different engagement opportunities. You can also visit engagestc.ca. The budget engagement tool is there as well for you to be able to fill out at your convenience. And as always, I encourage all members of the community to email budget@stcatharines.ca for any information you wish to bring to my or the budget committee's attention. Like last year, we have moved to a committee of the whole style budget committee for the deliberations over the draft budgets. So I would strongly encourage residents, if you are able to, use the engagestc.ca tool or email budget@stcatharines.ca. And if you are so inclined, please do ensure that you tune in to one of the virtual town halls or the telephone town hall next week. With that, I will look to the clerk for the adoption of the agenda.
We have two amendments to the agenda. The first is Patrick McCurry has registered as a delegate for agenda item 9.2, the replacement of the Mayfield Avenue Stairs Lake access. And the second amendment is the staff recommendation for item 8.1 has changed. The recommendation will now read that report FMS 163-2021 regarding the 2022 capital budget, 2023 to 2026 forecast and asset management status be received for information, and that councilors are requested to submit amendments to staff prior to November 3rd meeting. This revised recommendation will be shown on the screen when the report is being considered.
Are there any other amendments to the agenda? All right, seeing none, moving the motion to adopt the agenda, I have Councillor Garcia and a seconder, Councillor Phillips. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Adoption of the minutes, there are none. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest this evening? All right, seeing none, just a reminder, councillors are required to submit written statements of declarations to the deputy clerk and the council coordinator via email. We'll now move on to the consent reports that council approve. We have a motion that council approve the consent agenda, save and accept those items brought forward for discussion. And moving the motion to approve the consent agenda, Councillor Phillips. And I'll look to the clerk. Oh, Councillor Garcia.
May I ask a question just on the memorandum on 6.1? Just for understanding, so we are going ahead with the town hall, it's just that we're not having polling questions, that's the only difference?
That is correct.
Thank you.
And I'm just looking to make sure, Ms. Douglas, yes, that is correct. And that was a decision that came out of the many deliberations we've had, and so we're looking to a completely different setup for next year, which I think was the will of council and the budget committee. Okay, I'll look to the clerk. Oh, Councillor Williamson, apologies.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on the same item, the information that is gleaned from this polling data is only for the exclusive use of the city of St. Catharines and for no other purpose. Is that part of the description of our contractor agreement with this firm?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll look to the clerk.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Porter?
Yes.
Councillor Williamson?
Yes.
Councillor Littleton?
Yes.
Councillor Miller?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge?
Yes.
Councillor Garcia?
Yes?
Mayor Senzik?
Yes.
And Chair Cisco.
Yes.
And that's carried.
All right. We're moving past consent reports and presentations. We'll move right to item 8, the discussion reports. Item 8.1, financial management services, corporate asset management, 2022 capital budget, 4-year forecast, and asset management status. Prior to discussing the report, council will receive presentations from city staff. I will then suggest that we move to item 9.2, prior to consideration of the staff report as it relates directly to the draft capital budget. And this time I'll call on David Oakes, the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, to provide introductory remarks. Mr. Oakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to be here. I am in my office just around the corner, and I'll be in the council chambers after the presentation to answer any questions that we may have. As we move forward, we're in a new phase of the pandemic, a phase that sees both optimism for getting back to normal routines and activities, as well as a phase that has us dealing with very complex issues to manage public health guidance while setting the stage to get life back to normal. The challenge for staff is to build back better and learn from the past 19 months. However, in order for us to be able to build back better, we must also manage the economic and fiscal reality of a lower capacity for the taxpayer to manage increasing costs. As we move out of the pandemic, there are several factors affecting how and when we can, in fact, get back to normal. Throughout the pandemic, we've been dealing with increased public health related costs, such as cleaning, screening, security, and other related costs associated with the pandemic. coupled with reduced revenues associated with these necessary measures, whether it's reduced capacities, program changes, or actual reduction in program offerings in their entirety. So at the same time, COVID has amplified many inequities in the community, whether it's mental health and addictions to affordable housing, while also showcasing new areas for the community to enjoy, such as our beaches, our trails, our parks, etc. These shifts in expectations and new realities are challenging to support through the local tax base, and is one of the pressures that we have noted and we will note in the presentations moving forward. The 2022 draft budgets presented tonight allow us to continue to offer our residents the services we have always offered, balanced against the economic reality presented by the pandemic. We have seen our city grow at an immense rate in a very short period of time, and finance and the SLT group have worked very hard to provide a reasonable budget that maintains the status quo through various mitigation efforts. Moving forward, our decisions need to evolve alongside our city and align more to our strategic plan. As many of you recall, in the report from October 4th, I indicated that in order to position the city for success, we must align the strategic plan with our corporate initiatives, which essentially rest within the operating and capital budgets. The challenge for us beyond 2022 will be how we prioritize what we can and what we cannot do to be included in our future budgets. While this budget deals with balancing the existing services, it does not include many items that will be needed to address the future needs and service expectations of this council and the public. We need to continue to work together to position our city for success, adjust our thinking, and meet the changing demands of our city and prepare for our future. This will require a multi-year financial recovery plan to get us back to pre-COVID levels, while also managing the expectations of what we can do and what we cannot do with the resources we have. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pass it over to, I believe, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. Before we move on, we do have a presentation now from Mr. Martuccio and Ms. Tourigny with respect to the budget. Are there any questions directly for Mr. Oakes before we move on with respect to his introductory remarks? Councilor Garcia?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you say questions on the capital budget itself?
No, there'll be a presentation from Mr. Martuccio and Ms. Tourigny, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions related to the capital budget at that point. All right, then, seeing none, I will turn things over to Anthony Martuccio, the Director of Engineering, Facilities, and Environment Services, and Anne Tourigny, the Corporate Asset Manager, to provide a presentation on the 2022 capital budget.
Thank you. Good evening, Budget Chair, General Committee members, citizens, and senior staff. Before you tonight is the proposed 2022 capital budget and four-year forecast. The proposed 2022 capital budget and four-year forecast is the result of a collaborative effort amongst the various city departments that started in Q2 of 2021. Sorry, next slide, please. It recognizes the need to ensure that all city-owned infrastructure assets are sustainable into the future so that we can continue to provide basic core services, as well as the desire to enhance the quality of life for our residents and minimize environmental impacts while recognizing our economic challenges. The budget was developed keeping in mind many of the corporate strategies and plans, such as a transportation master plan, the water wastewater 10-year financial plan, the fire master plan, the climate adaptation plan, while also being guided by the recently endorsed asset management plan for core services. Next slide. The asset management plan for core services was developed using existing information available to staff and established a baseline upon which future plans can be built off of. We also began to develop decision-making tools to help inform and support decisions, all while incorporating risk into the decision-making process. This, along with the prioritization criteria listed above in the blue box, was used to help establish the capital budget. Carrying out coordinated projects allows the city to take advantage of economies of scale. Coordinated projects are projects where we carry out asset renewal on multiple asset classes at one time. In determining these projects, staff identify the most urgent needs for the group of assets as a whole, which means in some cases, asset renewal on individual assets are advanced or deferred to fit the project. Regional priorities and plans are also considered through this process. Next slide. The asset management plan. In the asset management plan, hierarchies were established to better define the relationship between assets and the services they provide. The transportation assets includes roads and active transportation, as well as the right-of-way assets such as traffic signals, signs, and streetlights. Together, these assets aim to provide a safe, efficient, accessible, and sustainable transportation system for multiple modes of transportation in accordance with regulatory requirements and the expectations of the community. The continued maintenance, repair, and renewal of these assets is critical in order to promote activity, livability, and connectivity, and result in a network of transportation infrastructure that enables peoples, goods, to travel seamlessly utilizing many modes of transportation. The proposed works to have a strong focus on the renewal and expansion of the active transportation facilities such as multi-use paths. Next slide. You will also notice that the capital budget includes these condition performance graphs for the major core asset classes. These graphs identify what the forecasted condition of each asset class will be if current funding levels are maintained. Transportation assets are primarily tax-based expenditures, and as identified in the asset management plan, this asset class is currently underfunded. Based on this information, budget needs for this asset class were prioritized at a little higher in developing this budget. Next slide. The water distribution system provides safe and reliable drinking water and supports fire suppression for the residents and businesses within the urban boundary. The works proposed in the budget include the replacement of critical water mains that have experienced multiple breaks, color water issues, or where materials have reached the end of their useful life. Next slide. This asset class primarily includes rate-based expenditures. And as identified in the AMP, implementing the planned rate increases identified in the water wastewater financial plan will allow for a robust water main replacement program. This, along with proactive operational programs, will make our system sustainable into the future. Staff continue to prioritize water assets due to the high level of risk associated with them. Next slide. The wastewater distribution system conveys sewage from residential, commercial, and industrial properties within the urban boundaries to the regional trunk main and ultimately to the wastewater treatment plants before being released into the lake. Priority sewer sections were identified through the citywide Zoom camera inspection and evaluation project that was recently completed. The priority sewer sections have identified deficiencies within the potential of basement flooding. The proposed budget includes an allocation to address some of the top priority locations and conduct further CCTV inspections to more accurately identify potential concerns. Next slide. Similar to water, it is critical to maintain the funding identified in the water wastewater financial plan in order to maintain current condition rating for this asset class. Next slide. A majority of the storm sewer work is focused on the installation of new storm sewers to allow for the separation of storm water from combined sewers or from infiltration into sanitary sewers. This type of work assists in alleviating basement flooding and overflows into the environment. The proposed works also include the provision of CCTV inspection for parts of the storm sewer system to better identify concerns with regards to the condition of our storm drainage system. Next slide. The storm sewer assets are tax-based expenditures, and as a result, existing funding levels may not be sustainable in the long term. Also, more than half of our annual budget goes towards new storm sewers as the city continues to work towards improving service to both protect and benefit the community and the environment. Next slide. The city owns and operates a vast variety of city-owned facilities that support both corporate functions, such as in City Hall, Lake Street Service Center, and our fire stations, as well as recreational and cultural functions, such as in our arenas, senior centers, park amenities, and museums. The 2022 budget includes renewal and repair work to many of these facilities to allow for the continued safe use, implementation of accessibility, and to meet the operational needs of the corporation. Many of these works support strategic plans approved by council, such as the Sunset Beach Master Plan, Arena Strategy, Fire Master Plan, and Conservation Demand Management Plan. Next slide. Other projects include renewal works to bridges and culverts, improvements to our natural assets through projects that stabilize our shorelines and improve the overall condition of our watercourses. The city continues to work collaboratively with the region to improve city assets through contributions to regional projects. Next slide. This capital budget includes approximately $5.4 million of projects that continue to support climate change and environmental stewardship through projects that improve or protect our natural assets and improve the efficiency of our facilities. Next slide. This budget also includes approximately $6.7 million of projects that support active and healthy living by implementing improvements to our active transportation network, renewing some of our park amenities, and making improvements to our recreational facilities. Many of these projects are included in the CRCS budget of $4 million. Larger fleet purchases totaling $640,000 have also been added to the 2022 capital budget. These vehicles support operational needs related to our core infrastructure. I will now pass things over to Ann Tarini, the city's corporate asset manager.
Thanks, Anthony. All the projects that have been included, next slide, please. All the projects that have been included in the 2022 budget, which Anthony has just reviewed, they total $54.9 million. Consistent with prior years, we fund these expenditures from a variety of sources. The Canada Community Building Fund, which was formerly called the Federal Gas Tax Fund, continues to provide an ongoing source of funding year over year. And the 9.25 contribution this year is higher than in prior years due to an additional one-time contribution of over $4 million. The reserve contributions include development charges of almost $2.3 million. And the balance of the funding comes from debt, which is providing 53% of the total funding in 2022. And that's comparable to the ratio in the prior years. Next slide, please. The debt funding of the city's capital expenditures is guided by the 3 key standards in the city's debt management strategy. And these are listed on the current slide. Of note, in 2022, we are proposing to temporarily depart from the 10% strategy for capital out of revenue contributions, so as to provide temporary relief to the operating budget. While the debt strategy caps debt charges at 10% of owner source revenue, the current forecast also reflects ratios that are slightly above 10% in 2022 and then afterwards. Next slide, please. Given the ongoing challenges that COVID has placed upon the operating budget, the 2022 capital budget continues to include reduced support from the operating and the rate-supported budgets. These reductions are intended to be temporary, but they are expected to occur for several years as we now anticipate that the financial implications of COVID-19 will be felt for several years. For 2022, these reductions in the contributions to capital are offset by increasing the funding from the Canada Community Building Fund and deferring projects, reallocations of prior year's surplus funding, and increased debt. Next slide, please. Looking at our capital plans and the related funding over the next 5 years is required by the Municipal Act. And these forecasts also support our debt forecasts. The green bottom band shows the projected debt funding. And in future years, as we do our actual budgets, we will be adjusting depending on our required expenditures and the funding details. Next slide, please. This graph shows the debt servicing costs in the lower blue blocks, and then also shows the debt council limit of 10% of our own source revenues. Looking at the orange line, the current forecast shows that the 2022 debt servicing ratio is moving above 10%, and then it reaches about 12.5% by 2026. As shown by the green line, the city does remain well within the provincial limit, which is better known as the annual repayment limit, or the ARL, and this is set at 25% of our own source revenues. And the gap between the orange and the green line shows the debt servicing room between the cities and the provincial's limit, the province's limits. The debt limits will change as our actual results are incorporated into the ratios. Next slide, please. The capital budget and the operating budget are interrelated, as the operating budget provides direct funding to the capital budget through the capital out of revenue charges, the reserve funding, the direct support for the roads and the sidewalks capital programs, and finally the infrastructure levy. Also, the operating budget funds the debt servicing on the debt that's issued to fund the capital budget. Before moving ahead, I wanted to highlight that the 2022 capital budget before you includes a recommendation for council to forward this through to the, sorry, I've lost my place there, just ignore that comment. The one thing about that is new for this year is in 2022, the capital overhead charges will provide funding back into the operating budget for an additional project management resource. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I want to highlight that the 2022 capital budget report before you today includes the staff recommendations for council's consideration after the public meeting where the budget is tabled, and this is planned for the November 15th meeting. The current schedule is for the 2022 capital budget to go to the November 29th council meeting for approval. The recommendations 2 and 5 on the slide relate to the funding of the 2022 capital budget and the specific exceptions that have been made related to the approved debt management strategy. Recommendations 3, 4, and 6 create funding capacity for the 2022 operating budget. Next slide, please. Mr. Chairman, this concludes staff's presentation on the 2022 capital budget and the 2023 to 2026 forecast. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Tourigny and Mr. Martuccio, as well as Mr. Oakes, for your presentations. Any members having questions at this time? And before we continue, I do want you to think, if you have questions, raise your hand if you're on Zoom. If you're here, just hold for a moment. My request this evening, and there was an email that was sent out on Friday last week, just detailing the meetings that we have coming up. My hope tonight is that, with the exception of the motion that's already been placed on the agenda, any other amendments, I'm asking that we not try to make amendments to the capital budget this evening. The motion as it was written and is going to be put on the screen in a few minutes is that those amendments be forwarded through to staff, through Ms. Douglas, so that we can bring them together as an entire package. So if there are suggestions for amendments, additions, deletions, whatever the case may be, I'm asking that rather than trying to make those amendments this evening, because we do have several meetings, that we send those through to staff so that they can be dealt with at the November 3rd meeting. And I just wanted to say that before we begin, because I know that there will be suggestions. I've already heard of a few suggestions. And to make this as orderly a process as possible, I'm asking again that we forward those through, with the exception, obviously, because Councillor Garcia had a motion prepared, and this is a fitting night to be able to deal with that motion. Okay. So with that said, Councillor Garcia, you said you had some questions.
Yes,
so now would
yes,
be
I do, Mr. Chair. Could we put the motion on the screen first, or?
Yep, I will look to the council coordinator. So the motion for 8.2 is there. Receiving for information purposes.
Can't see it, Chair. Sorry. It's
Okay.
not on it. It's not coming up.
Should be coming up momentarily. All right, and we are back. My apologies for the technical difficulties, but we did want to make sure we had the information on the screen. So the revised staff recommendation as amended this evening, that we receive the capital budget and forecast for information, and the councils be requested to submit amendments to staff prior to the November 3rd, 2021 meeting. All right, Councilor Garcia, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, so my questions regard the staff recommendation in detail. Can I address those? Or, yeah. So, number one, I wanted through you, Mr. Chair, staff to please expand on the point that a 5% capital out of revenue funding instead of 10%, and we say which is consistent with the COVID-19 financial recovery plan. So I wanted to understand how the financial recovery plan makes it 5%.
Ms. Douglas?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. With regards to the 5% capital out of revenue from the tax levy budget to support capital, in the 2021 capital or operating budget and capital budget, we, as a mitigation measure to reduce the pressure on the tax levy, we reduced the capital out of revenue that we would normally for any project that was funded by debt. We funded the portion funded by debt by 5% instead of our normal 10%. And then as we're looking to come out of the recovery, since we've been in COVID much longer than any of us, I believe, anticipated, we are looking to slowly bring that percentage back up to the 10%, and staff are working on developing that financial recovery plan, which we'll be bringing forward to council during our budget deliberations. And so that is the details that we have with regards to the capital out of revenue reduction that we've done for the tax levy support.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, so you're saying the recovery, even though hopefully one of these days we'll be out of the pandemic, we're not just going back up to 10%, but we have to gradually get up to the 10%?
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor, yes, what we're looking at right now, because of the many needs that the city has with regards to our infrastructure, we are looking at phasing in our return to the 10%. If the situation does change, that if there, are and numerous other funding opportunities that present themselves, then each year we will reevaluate that and look at returning to that 10% as soon as we can. But I think at this point we need to be going a little more slowly and more phased in order to make sure that we are balancing the infrastructure needs with the ability and the affordability for our residents.
Thank you for that. And through you, Mr. Chair, a question on the requested approval of an additional FTE in the operating budget. Was that FTE included in the organizational presentation we received from the CAO, or is this a totally new position?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, with regards to the addition of a full-time staff complement as a project manager position. This is a position that would be new. It is my understanding it was not included as part of the CAO's previous presentation to council. The intent of this position is that it will be focused on project management, getting infrastructure projects completed, and it will be, although it is an operating budget charge, there will be recoveries from the capital projects that project manager is working on to support that. So the net impact on the operating budget will be offset, so to speak, so that they come to nil. But this is something that we have seen other municipalities doing with a way to get additional projects completed within their capital program.
And I'm just going to very briefly and look to the CAO because he unmuted for a moment. Does he wish to speak, or did Ms. Douglas cover that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Douglas did cover it. She's correct. It wasn't specifically noted within my presentation last week, but she explained it very well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Martuscio, I guess, how were we doing this before having this project manager, and why do we need a project manager now?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair. In recent years, there's been multiple regulations that have come down from higher levels of government that staff have been reacting to that has taken a lot of attention away from the delivery of projects, projects like the asset management plan, the excess soil regulations, the consolidated linear infrastructure regs that have been coming down. This has taken a lot of time away from our current staff, and it has resulted in less infrastructure work going out the door. So this position is focused strictly on conducting projects and getting projects out the door without having to address those other corporate needs that have just been added to our current staff complement.
Thank you. And Director Martuscio, if you, pardon me, if you wouldn't mind increasing your volume. For some reason, I have trouble hearing you, but not everybody else on Zoom. If we add this as an overhead charge, would that be visible in the project, or is that something that will be buried and included, and we just take it out of the cost of the project?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, maybe I'll start, and then Director Douglas can add. I think the current intent is to there's an allocation when we put our capital budget together for the linear infrastructure projects that we increase the budget for those projects to accommodate for the additional project manager. And as Ms. Douglas identified, it will be an allocation that gets funded back to our operating.
Thank you for that. Pardon me. My last question, Mr. Chair, relates to debt, which is always a concern of mine. So I believe Ms. Torini said that in the 2022, we're projecting that 53% would be funded by debt. Number one question related to that is that significantly higher than it was in normal years, like 2019, let's say? Does anybody know that, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, the 53% of debt funding our capital program is comparable to previous years' portion of debt funding.
Okay, thank you. But when I look at the slide where we showed color-coded what was happening in future years, it certainly appears like if that percentage is increasing, because I don't think our operating budget is increasing that fast, right? So if that green portion that was debt is higher in the chart there, in the bar chart, that would mean that 53% is increasing, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, in the forecasted years, in that particular chart, you could see that this year, the capital program is at approximately $54.9 million, and you can see that in 2023 and 2024, we are closer to $70 million in our capital program forecasted for projects to be completed. So debt will be increasing in future years with regards to completing capital infrastructure needs.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment, Mr. Chair, as I always say, I get concerned that that we're breaching that 10% ratio, which is a council policy, as I understand, even though we have more room under the provincial guidelines. But I asked this question last year as well. If that 10% is council-approved policy, do we need a special approval to go over that 10%, or is just by approving the capital budget?
So I believe it is simply the approval of the capital budget, but I will look to Ms. Douglas.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have a specific recommendation in the capital budget report that is asking council to approve our going over the 10% debt management strategy as we estimate it to be the 10.07 in 2022.
Thank you. And you are forecasting it to be significantly higher in future years as well, right, than the 10.17?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, over the five-year capital budget term, the 2026, we are forecasting it to be 12.5%. I do want to note to council that with regards to our debt forecast, it is based on a number of assumptions. The modeling is based on a 4% interest rate in 2021. The interest rate was much less than that. It was slightly over 1%. However, we don't know when with debt what the terms will be. Another item that has is providing a significant amount of pressure with regards to our debt as a percentage of our own source revenues is that COVID has impacted the city's non-own source revenues, in that we haven't been able to collect the same number of our own source revenues because of our facilities needing to be closed, our transit system not being operational at full capacity. So there are a number of factors, that are impacting that debt. And as we do each year, we monitor that and bring the information forward to council. But I do believe as we go forward with regards to our capital program and balancing the needs of the city and our residents and the capital program, that we need to take a balanced approach with regards to, and that does include us, needing to look at our debt.
Thank you. I think the 4% is conservative, as you said, but it's probably wise considering the inflationary pressures we're seeing. So thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. And I will take a moment just to reiterate, and Ms. Douglas did a good point, and I appreciate you bringing forward the comments, and specifically your final comment about it being a conservative estimate of what that interest rate will be. It's prudent for staff to be working through with a conservative number, but we do also know that we have a very large infrastructure debt or infrastructure deficit within the community. And Ms. Douglas, in terms of the infrastructure deficit, what was it pegged at? It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think it's important to recognize that our capital budget is how we try and make up some of that gap. But I will take this opportunity to point out that infrastructure deficit will not be fixed by the city alone. As you have very clearly pointed out, we can't simply place all of that infrastructure deficit on the backs of property taxpayers. Other levels of government have levers to pull, which we do not. They have the capacity to tax in ways, and frankly, they collect enough in taxes as it stands to be able to help municipalities. And I will make my annual plea to our provincial and federal representatives that we require assistance at this level. The vast majority of infrastructure in a community is owned, operated, and paid for by the municipality, either the city or the region. And the fact that our two levels of government combined only receive about 8 cents of every tax dollar, but control the vast majority of the infrastructure and provide the vast majority of services that residents access on a day-to-day basis, speaks to the fact that there is an imbalance in where people's tax dollars are going. So, as I said, I will make my annual plea to our provincial and our federal counterparts that they need to step up to the table with additional funding to help us deal with the infrastructure that people in our community use every single day. And with that, the mayor has his hands up. So, Mayor Sendzik.
Thank you, Chair, and really just brief comments. One is the project manager position. I want to applaud staff and the CAO and Director Martuccio for identifying that. That is a very important position that I think will help us better manage some of the significant projects that have been identified in here, and it will pay for itself. So looking forward to the approval of that. The debt ratio, just for my other colleagues, I have talked to the mayor of Barrie, Jeff Lehman, the mayor of Guelph, Cam Guthrie, and Barry Ravanovic from Kitchener-Waterloo, and I talked to him specifically around the debt ratio. I get that certain people want to hang on to that like it's some kind of code written in stone. You'll look at Barrie and Guelph's, their debt ratio is higher, and they're growing their community in a much more aggressive way around bike lanes, around better infrastructure on our roadways, multi-transportation pathways. They're doing it because they acknowledge that they are in the 15 to 18 percentage points of their debt ratio. We're really underservicing our community by fixating on that 10%. And I applaud staff for bringing this forward. I can't see why anyone would want to vote against something like this, because it does provide more room for accelerating infrastructure development without burdening the current taxpayer today. And it does allow for a longer flattening of the financial impact. So to the councillors who, again, have hung on to this, I think they need to do some more research and really talk to other municipalities like I have to be able to better understand. It does give us breathing room. And as part of COVID recovery, this is a breathing room that we need. So I hope we're not going to push too hard back on this debt ratio. And then, Chair, a couple of points that I'm just going to bring up, but I don't want answers, but this is more for staff. They're doing a Parnell reconstruction as part of this. I'm going to be looking to Anthony, Director Martuccio, for a meeting after. I want to make sure that includes bike lanes. And I know there's a number of councillors that have been talking about this. If we're going to do any major road reconstructions, I want to see the bike lanes that are a part of this. When it comes to things like the culvert management, I do want to have a discussion about areas where they've experienced some flooding, especially in the Arthur Street area, where you do have a culvert that has recently been built into under Arthur Street that is causing a significant amount of erosion heading into what would be the Lake Ontario area. So wanting to have further discussions about these impacts related to climate change and how these culverts can help to address significant flooding. And then the final point I'd like to make, Chair, is the vehicle replacement. I would like to be assured that any vehicle replacement that's a car is going to be an EV car. It's not going to be a hybrid, and it's not going to be a gas fueled. So maybe on that one, Chair, if I can get an answer on the vehicle replacement, because I will not support vehicle replacements any longer that aren't moved towards EVs. So that's just the position I'll be taking, because if we're going to do a climate emergency, we better see the results of the climate emergency. So, Chair, if I could have an answer on that one, I think the rest of them I'll take offline with Director Martuccio.
All right. I see Mr. Smith's hand up. I'm assuming it's in response.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. We do have a fleet purchase policy in place to use alternate source, specifically EV vehicles, where possible. Some of our larger assets, such as some of our tandem trucks and things like that, it's not possible to switch to EV. They don't provide the power, the service range. But every vehicle that can be switched is being switched. So that includes pickup trucks, SUVs, cars, and that is going forward through the budget process.
Okay. And so, Chair, if when this comes back in November for the final, if in the detail we can see which vehicles would be replaced with EV. And then one final point, Chair, is we do have a lot of lawn equipment that is being used, and lawn equipment such as lawnmowers at City Hall and leaf blowers and things like that, and weed control, those weed whackers. Where would I go, Chair, for a discussion on making sure that we're transitioning to battery operated instead of fossil fuel for those equipment pieces? Is that part of Director Smith, or is that Director Martuccio?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. Yes, that is the small equipment purchases that are done through Municipal Works.
And do we have a policy there about moving to EV as well?
As again, we have been testing some EV equipment. There is still some usage issues with respect to service length. Some of our larger parks we can't really service with EV because the equipment will just not. We can't actually keep enough chargers and enough batteries to make it through some of those larger parks. But again, where possible, we are switching. And of course, there are improvements being made in this type of equipment every year. And every year we get with our equipment suppliers and we look at ways to again reduce our carbon footprint by modernizing our equipment with EV as much as we can.
Okay, and through the chair, one final comment on that is, as we move certain parks towards fossil fuel parks, if there's a way that we can put signage up, and I know I'm getting into the weeds with Chair, but it just reminds me that if say Montebello Park is being serviced by only EV, or the City Hall Park is being serviced by EV equipment, it would be a good public outward facing way of us to demonstrate to the community that, when you hear about climate strikes and then we do a climate emergency, we want to show the community that we're actually doing what we've said we're going to do. So just a minor one, the Chair, and I'll save the rest for staff to my office interaction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I just wanted to advise the mayor that the fire department has made the same commitment. In 2021, we replaced 3 of our cars in the fire prevention division in their electric vehicles, and our new fire truck that is currently being built has some green technology on it too that will be able to lessen the amount of diesel fuel that's used in it.
Awesome. Good job.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chief. Any other questions or comments with respect to the capital budget? Everybody here? So Councillor Phillips, followed by Councillor Littleton, and then Councillor Porter.
Well, I was just going to make a point as far as, and it's not in the capital budget, but at a previous council meeting, I asked Director Martuccio to prepare a report regarding expanding the parking lot at Rawls Farm. Excuse me. I did get an email back from him today saying that yes, it is possible, but there's a significant price tag to it. However, shortly after that council meeting, I did get a response from Brian Appleby in regards to signage on that road, and they're going to put up signs as far as parking limitations and restrictions for next year. So we won't need that report or that expansion of the parking lot for next year for sure. Hopefully never. As long as this the parking limitations and signages work. So I guess that's good news, because it's $500,000 that down the road we're not going to have to spend.
That sounds like excellent news. I will say I was at Happy Rolf's this past weekend with my kids, and the turnover in the parking lot was brisk, but people were enjoying the new park facilities, so it was good to see a number of families getting out and enjoying the last burst of good weather before it gets cold. Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. I think they're going to be to Director Martuccio. The first one is the Moffett street secondary access. Can you give an update on where we are with that?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, yes, we're in the final stages of the environmental assessment for the Moffett Street secondary access. I believe that information related to the recommendations as a result of the EA identify that the location for the secondary access is being proposed through properties not owned by the city, and that may be part of negotiations for either acquiring of lands or through future developments in order to accommodate that secondary access. I believe that's it. So there's, as you'll see, there's nothing currently included in the 2022 capital budget to address the secondary access at this time.
And that's where I was going with that. I didn't think I'd seen it. So where is it going to be? What year are we looking at? Because obviously this is a project that is long overdue.
Again, through you, Mr. Budget Chair, with regards to timing, this is something that we'll have to discuss internally to determine when and how we will approach the landowner about potential purchase or land exchange for the lands that are required to accommodate the street. I don't have an exact time with regards to when in the future the access will be included in the budget.
Okay. On page 58 of the report, it's talking about the old courthouse. You're going to have to forgive me. This is the building that's beside us here at City Hall. What goes on there?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, currently there are staff, CRCS is located in the old courthouse. So we do have staff that are accommodated within the building. As a result of the potential sale of the lands on Geneva Street. So the works identified in the capital budget are to maintain that asset. There's painting and repairs that are required to some of the windows on the facility.
Okay, is there a long-term plan for that property?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, there have been multiple discussions related to the long-term plan of that facility. I don't believe that as of right now there is a definite plan with regards to the ultimate fate or ownership related to the building. Currently, the city owns it, and city staff are located in the facility.
I will add that my former board colleague, Councillor Elliott, had been asking for an end-use plan for the old courthouse. I'm going to assume during his first term with Councillor Phillips, although he may have been calling for it before then, and we are still waiting for said.
That's correct.
Yes, I said end-use plan.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this. $200,000 for, yeah, okay. And further to that, the Buchanan House. What goes on at the Buchanan House?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, again, Buchanan House is used to house city staff. Currently, our environmental department, as well as HR, are located out of the Buchanan House, and there are some community needs also being serviced on the lands of the Buchanan House property.
I'm just, just throwing this out here when I'm looking at the $700,000 for these two properties. And, we've gone through a pandemic where we see that clearly we don't need people to be working in offices necessarily. So I'm wondering if this is maybe something the city is looking at long-term to see exactly how many folks can work from home, how many need to be in a building. Maybe I understand the gardens at the Buchanan House are beautiful. I have been back there. They're absolutely stunning. But I'm just wondering if we move that end of use plan for the old courthouse here and maybe move everybody over to Buchanan House. I'm just throwing out an idea here. Just the point is, do we need all the office space? $700,000 is a lot of money. So that's my only comment on that.
All right, I have Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Martuccio, I'm just building upon Mayor Senzik's comments related to the bike lanes. So in last year's capital budget, we put in a motion and we asked for some kilometers of protected bike lanes. And I understand that's the ideal location for those bike lanes were on regional roads, major roads that had few houses where it would make sense to put a protected bike lane. But some complications happened at the region. The region had agreed and then no work actually happened. City staff were trying, and then when they decided to go ahead on a city road, it was difficult to get the bollards and the supplies. So I see a few projects on page 17. I see there's a budget for citywide trail improvements, and it does mention bike lanes there. And it mentions just a general active transportation priority budget of $250,000. So I'm wondering is there going to be a plan for a minimum network of protected bike lanes come forward at some point? And I would also like to know, staff were working on a tender for an active transportation plan. I can't remember if we'd already budgeted for that. I don't see that in this budget. Was that approved in a past budget? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, yes, the active transportation master plan was approved through previous funding. That document or that RFP is currently being finalized to be issued. The intent is to get that work completed next year so that we can answer a lot of the questions that you have with regards to where bike lanes will be implemented, where we will have various levels of service related to bike lanes. However, we do need to complete that document in order to set priorities on how works are going to move forward. The capital budget does have, some multi-use paths that are going to be constructed next year. It also has some studies that will look at closing the gap on some active transportation networks, including on Bunting Road. You'll see there's work to do a visioning study to improve active transportation through that so that we can connect the north and south sections of the city. There's work on Parnell Road, as Mayor Senzik has alluded to earlier, that will include bike lanes as well. However, we do have to complete the design work this year. So we are still putting a very strong focus on bike lanes, active transportation. There's steps that we have to take in order to be able to get there. With regards to implementing the pilot for protected bike lanes, our intent is to move forward with that next year. We did procure, part of the problem was procuring bollards and equipment in order to implement it. As you'll know, this year there was an issue with regards to supply of products, as well as coordination with other entities that were partnering with us on the project. But the intent is to implement that in early spring as soon as we are able.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you were talking, I just remembered that the funding for the active transportation plan came from the federal government, I think now. I just forgot about that, sorry. So it wasn't in last year's budget, but it was just money that we ended up getting, and then we decided that we needed an active transportation plan. Thank you. I do understand the need for planning to do things right. Just the members of the community see kind of work happening in other cities and wondering where the bike lanes are here. There's an excellent multi-use path that was built up near Brock that goes into Thorold that the region did, and it's great. So I do have to highlight that. I know the region's trying to prioritize that, but can I ask if the conversation is continuing, or do we need to do some advocacy with the region around the protected bike lane pilot project, or do you think it's going to happen?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, the conversations with the region are continuing. It is dependent on them being able to get budget to match the dollars that we've set aside to do ours. If they are not, we do have a backup plan for next year to implement it on city streets so that we can put something into place for residents to use.
Okay, thank you. That sounds to me like we have to do some advocacy, so I appreciate that. So I don't have any other further questions at this moment. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? All in chambers have asked. All right, I see Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe redirect me if some of these questions are premature. I did have a question through you, the chair, about the Clifford's Creek basketball court update, which I'm excited about. Obviously, drop some threes over Mayor Senzik there. I'm looking forward to it. But I know that the swings there need to be updated as well. So, and there was some talk about, well, we're waiting to do the swings so we do the playground. But now I see we're doing the basketball court. So, how do we? Why wouldn't we do all those things at once, I guess is my question.
Maybe I'll refer that question to Eric Lamoth.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. When we're looking at the parks renewal plan, we do look at parks as a whole and looking at the assets as a whole. In this particular circumstance, the age of the playground is not quite there's about approximately, I think, 20 playgrounds ahead of Clifford's Creek Playground. So we did want to focus on Clifford's Creek basketball court to ensure the health and safety and the availability to the residents.
Okay, and again, I certainly don't want to delay that. Just following on that, I guess, through you, the chair, what is the general? Because I see that the Burgoyne Woods playground's being renewed, and if I recall, now I might be dating myself, but that seemed relatively new to me. So, is there a timeline on what the average lifespan of these things are?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the average lifespan of a playground is approximately 20 years.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to get into sort of nitpicking the timelines or anything. It just sometimes it seems like if we're going to be there doing work, maybe we should try to combine them. But I certainly appreciate what you're saying. My next question is about the splash pad. The amount that's budgeted for splash pad, I believe, is $1 million. And I know we don't know the location yet or anything. So there was there was going to be some disparity depending on the location because some might need something like a change room and some might not. So could staff just maybe expand on how that $1 million was arrived at?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, I'll probably start with that question. If Eric, if you got anything to add. Yeah, the $1 million is in order to implement a splash pad and a washroom / change facility for the site. It's generally the approach that we take where we have these types of facilities so that the users have the amenities required in order to use the splash pad.
And through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, you're absolutely right that the location still to be determined, but we'd work with the Recreation Master Plan Advisory Committee as well as the Outdoor Aquatics Task Force to help determine the locations as well as community consultation.
Okay, and I guess for my benefit, maybe the public's as well, if we do pick a location that I know some of the budgets for the design, but if we do pick a location where the cost is lower, what happens to that budgeted capital, the excess budgeted capital funds?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll perhaps answer this question. With regards to when a project comes in under budget, the first thing is if it's funded by debenture, then we debenture less dollars. If there's monies that were to come from a reserve, then we would leave those dollars in the reserve so that they could be reallocated to future years.
Okay. Okay, I'll try, sorry for the glut of questions here. Just a couple, I guess, little notes. I don't have the page number, but there's reference to next 2022's budget, including $6,000, I think it is, for civic celebrations through the Lions Club of Meriton, the Lions Club, I think the Grantham Lions Club as well.
Councillor, is this related to the operating budget?
I don't think so. You might be right.
$6,000 for, that doesn't sound like something that would be in the capital.
Yeah, all right. I'll take your word on that one.
I think it's under civic celebrations.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I think that's operating. If we can, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll hold off on that one. Okay, then I think just two more questions, and one's not really a question. On page 109, there's a reference to the Burgoyne Woods Arena, which I think probably gave people a lot of pause. I assume that's a typo, and that's for the Bill Burgoyne Arena. I just hate to see us sneak a whole hockey arena in without public consultation. My last question, I think this is capital. I think this is the clerk's office. A while ago, this was pre-COVID. I think both Mayor Senzik and myself had brought up the idea of recording in camera meetings, and then I think there was some capital required for that. So we were going to get a report back. I'm just curious, did that ever move forward? Did we ever get any estimations on that cost?
Through the chair, there is still an outstanding report on the ORL related to that item.
Okay, is there a timeline on that?
It is with the legal department. We can ask the solicitor to follow up with you on a timeline.
Okay. Okay. Okay, and I guess I'll just a question to Mr. Marticchio through the chair with regards to you know what, this probably is this operating with regards to the Rainbow Crosswalk. That was a pilot project. I know the advisory committee have wanted to look at other crosswalks. There was mention of one recognizing Indigenous reconciliation and other locations for a Rainbow Crosswalk. Is there a timeline in terms of when we evaluate that that pilot and start looking at other locations or other options?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, you're correct. The Rainbow Crosswalk was a pilot. We will be reevaluating it this year, or evaluating it. I think it's been a success. However, the operating budget did not allow us, the guidance for the operating budget did not allow us to implement any further dollars to expand on that. Actually, city staff had difficulty just meeting the regulatory obligations of line painting in the city this year due to the paint storage. You might notice some of the crosswalks downtown are fairly faded, and that's because we can't get contractors or the paint to do that. So our focus has been on making sure that next year we have enough funds to make sure we meet the regulatory requirements related to line painting.
Okay, that sounds like a red flag if I've ever heard one in terms of safety. We might not have the budget to meet our regulatory requirements for something around safety. That's a little scary and maybe something for us to keep in mind when we discuss the operating budget. But I will leave it at that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I will, for clarity's sake, and Mr. Marticchio can correct me, I don't know if that was a lack of budgetary ability to meet the regulatory obligations. It sounded to me like your explanation was there was a lack of capacity in that we couldn't find contractors or the paint to do it.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, that's correct. But it's also with regards to our budget and the guidance that we use for next year, our focus was to make sure that we had enough funds in the budget to address our regulatory compliances. So we weren't able to add additional funds for an additional crosswalk.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure the community understood that we are, from a budgetary perspective, we were able to. And I will say, Councillor, Miller, thank you for pointing out, for those who were curious, there is not an arena being planned for Burgoyne Woods. That is a typo at the back of the capital budget, much as I'm sure Councillor Kushner and Harris would be thrilled to introduce a new recreational facility to their ward. With that, Councillor Williamson, followed by the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of, the Mayor talked about the climate change crisis, and in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation, we have a person responsible for overseeing this. It definitely it's useful to target alternative technologies for internal combustion, particularly combustion engine, particularly small ones, which are notoriously filthy. But there's, of course, a lot of other areas that may be a little less flashy, less visible. And that's about integrating some of these environmentally friendly practices into just general ways that we've done things. And we need to put it through this lens, because what experience has shown is oftentimes environmental practices are also financially effective and can save us some money when we do things right. So I'd like to see sort of maybe more broad application of that, and I think it ties in with both the operating and capital budgets. I mean, one example, we got a message a while back on the tree giveaway, and we're having people drive in from all over the city to one central location to get trees. Well, we got to think about the carbon footprint that is created, and when we do something like that, and try and find a better way to do it. And then when people get trees, do they actually get planted, and are they getting watered? And anyway, I didn't want to get into that kind of minute detail. One of my pet peeves has been for many years just ongoing, simple, routine maintenance stuff. And we talked about the old courthouse being probably the most significant publicly owned civic facility, heritage building in the city, anchored at a very important corner. It was our old town hall, as well as courthouse. So, and I look at the exterior of it and the fencing, and we spent a lot of money renewing it, probably going back 15 or 20 years. And I'm just concerned about everyday maintenance, windowsills, that kind of stuff, because if you don't do that, kind of similar to our roads, we go through and we do the tarring, the cracks, and that kind of stuff, so that we can delay big reconstruction projects on roads. Similarly, we take our vehicles and have them rust proof, that kind of the routine kind of maintenance. But it seems to be sometimes, I think, lost on structures like it, and the Port Dalhousie Lighthouse as well. I know we had work done on that in terms of because of the flooding that happened in 2017 and 2019. But if we're doing, I like to see on some of these kinds of structures, particularly the important ones, that we look at them manually or semi-annually to make sure that they're up to date. We're not faced with big tabs all at one time. The old commercial, you can pay me now or pay me later. Can't even remember what brand it was, but before, maybe Councillor Kushner or Councillor Phillips would remember. So, yeah, and then Parnell Road was mentioned, interestingly enough, and I'm a cyclist, and when I'm coming back from a ride on the East Pier at Port Weller, I have a choice of come back down Lakeshore Road, which has bicycle lanes, or Parnell Road, which doesn't at this point. And in essence, the lower risk road at the current time is Parnell. So I'm not saying not to put bike lanes on it, but it's interesting. And of course, there's also Walker's Creek, which is an alternative. And talk also about the active transportation and the money we got from the feds in terms of parks connections. I think we also need to be conscious of, if we're going to be putting asphalt into parks, that these connections have to make sense and do add to the bicycle network and the pedestrian network in general. And I don't know, I'm a little concerned about some of the recent work that it may not. Some of it's going to be useful, and some of it I think could have been put to better use. I think that's all I'll offer tonight. I'll have some other points to make down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And Mayor Sensic.
Just a quick clarification, Chair. Chestnut Street extension. So the way that I'm reading this report is that there's no anticipated work to be on the Chestnut, and it looks like a completion date of 2030. To Director Martuccio, can I just get an update on that one? Because I may go in a different direction depending on the reply.
Through Mr. Budget Chair, the staff have just recently started the EA with regards to the Chestnut Street extension. With regards to future planning of capital works, we're really waiting the results of the environmental assessment before we plan when that work will be completed.
So through the chair, and I'll just share this. I'm not going to belabor it. The amount of cyclists, and speaking of Councillor Williamson on his bike, the amount of cyclists that try to navigate the Glendale site from what would be the Penn Center over to Hartzell and Merritt Street. We're just waiting for an accident to happen for someone to get hit. And the reality is that Chestnut Street extension will create a safer pedestrian cycling experience for a lot of people in that part of the community. And for us to continue to have to wait for a significant piece of infrastructure that will create a more pedestrian friendly part of St. Catharines, I'm going to be asking more questions over the next couple of weeks, because if there's a way that we can accelerate that, and I defer to the ward councillors, but anyone who's a cyclist or anyone who navigates the Glendale area, it is a nightmare, and we're waiting. Someone's waiting to get hit there, and it'll be on all of us, because that Chestnut Street extension has been talked about for years, and we're still a decade away from even completing it. And I think that's a disservice to a lot of people in that area.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seeing no other questions or comments, can I have a mover to receive the staff presentations? Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Porter. The motion is the council receive the presentations, that report FMS 163-2021 regarding the 2022 capital budget, 2023 to 2026 forecast and asset management status be received for information, and that councillors be requested to submit amendments to staff prior to the November 3rd, 2021 meeting, which is our next budget committee meeting. Moved by Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Porter, and I will look to the clerk. Am I looking to the clerk? I am looking to the clerk.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Porter?
Yes.
Councillor Littleton?
Yes.
Councillor Miller? Easy yes. Councillor Garcia?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge? Councillor Dodge?
Yes. Amy?
Councillor Williamson?
Yes.
Mayor Senzik?
Yes.
And Chair Cisco?
Yes.
And that's carried.
Councillor Dodge, I think you unmuted and muted too quickly, so we caught the s of yes, which is why we needed it said again. I tried to reiterate your yes, but it wasn't taken by the clerk. At this point, unless members of council object, I would suggest that before we go on to, at this point that we move on to item 9.2, Councillor Garcia's motion for the replacement of the Mayfield Avenue stairs for lake access. And I'm seeing no objections. So we do have, before the motion is put on the floor and debated, we do have a delegation from Patrick McCurry. So I'm going to now call Patrick McCurry to present.
Mr. Chair, through you, if I could impose on Director Martuccio again to please increase his volume, because I know he's going to comment on this, and I'm having trouble hearing him clearly.
Okay, so before Mr. McCurry speaks, I would ask just to Councilor to Mr. Martuccio, and I think it's simply a matter of when you're holding the mic, it does seem to come through significantly more clearly. So if you can, thank you. So Mr. McCurry.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I am here to speak about the Mayfield Stairs. My wife and I live in the immediate Mayfield Abbey Mews area. Last summer, with only 2 short weeks' notice, the locals were advised of the Shoreline Protection project and loss of Lake Stairs access, which has been in this location for approximately 60 years. This feature was prior to amalgamation of the village of Port Dalhousie to the city of St. Catharines. There are concrete etchings in place at the base of the stairs that date back to 1958. Citizens displayed their disappointment by emailing the city in an effort to retain this local treasure last year. Once council became aware of how much this access meant to residents, a motion was made to investigate costs and design for replacement access in the 2021 budget. Delays have occurred and it is now being revisited for 2022. With the current agenda dealing with this topic, there has been renewed interest from residents eager to see restoration of the water access in this area. If this is given consideration, the residents would like to have input into the design and the location of this access. We have firsthand knowledge of the shoreline since the protection has been completed. Things have changed along the shoreline, and we understand that the Mayfield Stairs do not currently comply to codes and accessibilities. So they must be replaced. There's no choice in retaining these existing stairs. City staff have provided a rough cost estimate of a low end of $200,000 for a single access to the lake, which would include new stairs down to the shoreline protection and some kind of boardwalk or something over the small boulders and the large armor stone wall that's at the base of the water. This would not be a safe access route, as this wall is a few meters above water level, and there is now a debris field of large boulders from this project scattered throughout the previous sandy bottom swimming area. This now makes a very unsafe situation. Nobody wants to swim around boulders that are 4 and 5 feet in diameter, and it would be very difficult to get off of the drop of the wall to the water's edge. We feel a superior access and a more affordable alternative would be to install new stairs at Christie Street, which is 2 streets east of Macefield and is at the end of the shoreline protection wall. There is currently a small sandy beach area of approximately 20 feet plus or minus, which appears to be in the city road allowance and could provide access for multiple forms of recreational access at a much lesser cost. If we went with the former one with Macefield, this would eliminate people like swimmers and other recreational facilities. I think if this is going to have to be done, it has to accommodate everyone. If we can, yes, I was just going to ask Maureen to do that. If we can look at the pictures, the first picture is the existing stairs down to the water. At Macefield, you can see it's very steep. You can see the shoreline down below, very small boulders and then larger ones. As a note, the staircase is still in place. It was supposed to be removed with the shoreline protection. You've got a no trespassing sign at the top, but people are still cutting over there, going down to the unsafe area. So I think the city should look at that right away. Anyway, if we can look at the second picture, we have the right-of-way at the end of Christie Street. Very large, wide open area, much larger than Macefield. If we can continue to the next one. This is the small sandy beach area that we believe is in the road allowance at Christie Street. It's, if you see it, if you look at the stone protection at the bottom of the screen to the boulder on the left-hand side, we're estimating that's probably where the the new lot line, or the lot line would be to the privately owned properties to the east. Next picture, please. This is the actual hillside from Christie Street down to the area that we thought was a good location. It's a much gradualer decline, could accommodate superior designs than what would have to be designed for the steep drop at the Mayfield location. Things like switchbacks or landing areas could be put in there. We feel it would be at a much less cost than the Mayfield location. We can go down one more. And this is the shoreline view from around where the lot line would be on the east side to the shoreline protection. As you can note, these sandy beach areas, at least people could go in there, they could swim, they can launch a kayak from the beach, they can sit there with lawn chairs, all the things they used to do at the bottom of Mayfield, which they wouldn't be able to do if we'd go ahead with the Mayfield location now. I think that's all. One more. This is the shoreline protection that has just been installed. This is in the east end of it. It's close to the end of the shoreline. And if you look on the picture, those two trees that are on the left side is around where Mayfield Stairs are. So I know somebody was thinking of putting a boardwalk off Mayfield Stairs all the way over to the Christie Street area, which would probably cost a fortune to get over those rocks. So anyway, that's all I have for now. If anyone has any questions or anything else, I'd be pleased to hear from you.
All right, thank you, Mr. McCurry. If we have any questions of the presenter, Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Mr. McCurry. Mr. McCurry, you raised some very valid arguments. Have you spoken to many people? Because we've got a lot of comments about Mayfield straight up being replaced. I just wonder what you're hearing with your neighbors.
In regard to the location, you mean?
Yeah, going to Christie as opposed to Mayfield.
I really haven't had a lot of time to discuss that with anyone. This thing has come up pretty quick, and we started looking at alternative areas. And when I started thinking about Mayfield, we've kayaked over that area that looks like a minefield right now. There's no way I would want anyone swimming in there. That's that's turned into a very dangerous swimming area from what was previously a nice swimming area. So, you know, we have to replace those stairs regardless from Mayfield downward. That is a very steep slope. I think the costs are going to be way more at Mayfield than they would at Christie Street, but maybe we could, you know, get some more local input now that we've got some time to deal with it. Could put it on Facebook and get some feedback on it.
Right, and your impression is that it would serve the community just as well, pretty much at Christie than as at Mayfield?
I think it would, because as I say, at Mayfield now, you're going to eliminate swimmers. Anybody that wants to paddleboard over that area with those large boulders, well, I wouldn't want to fall off a paddleboard and land on one of those. So you're eliminating, like, I don't know what you could do. I think it would be a complete waste of money putting stairs down there in that location now. Nobody can get in the water.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, other questions? Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. McCurry, thank you for your presentation and for those photos. Could you share with council how widely used these stairs were, and you know, what were they used for, who used them, et cetera, to give council a perspective on it?
Okay, well, I have lived in St. Catharines for 40 plus years, but I've only moved to Port Dalhousie in 2018. So most of my experiences, although I have been to that location before I moved there, most of my experiences since 2018. I remember the fall of 2019 when we had a heat wave in September. Everyone was down at the base of Mayfield Stairs. There was probably about 30 or 40 people down there. I couldn't believe the people that we met, that were neighbors, that were residents, that were people in other areas of St. Catharines, that were friends of residents that came down there. This feature is something that you don't find in every urban neighborhood in any city. And, it's brought people together. It's just a community treasure as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you for that. And I think you said they're used not just for walking down and getting in the water and swimming, but also to take kayaks and paddle boards and canoes and so on.
Yes, everybody had their kayaks and paddle boards tied up down there on a seasonal basis. People would walk their dogs down there in the heat so they could get in the water and cool off. A lot of the residents just sat down there on lawn chairs, dangling their feet in the water. Some of the older residents that, did not want to swim and that kind of thing. So everybody had their own thing about it. But I spoke to a lot of people in the area, and there's people there that have had generations of families going down there and enjoying that particular feature.
Thank you very much.
All right. Councillor Porter, question for Mr. McCurry.
Thank you, Mr. McCurry. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the presenter, it looks like what you're proposing in the new area near Christie Street, it doesn't seem to be as big of an area. Did I understand you correctly when you said it was 20 feet, like the beach area by Christie Street, and looks to be less than what was at Macefield?
Oh, yes, that's correct. I mean, what was at Macefield, basically, depending on the time of year, was a rough, small beach that went from Christie Street all the way to Considine. All of those areas that are covered with the shore protection were beach at different times. So yes, it's being reduced, but it's better than the pile of rocks that are at the bottom of Macefield right now. Like, you can't do anything there. And there's a sharp drop off now from the Armour Stone to the water.
Okay.
Unless you want.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just 20 feet wide, so I'm 6 feet tall, so that's 3.5 of me if I'm lying down. I'm just trying to envision. That's how I think of things, by the way, is with my own height. And then my next question, did you know about these stairs before you moved to Port Dalhousie? Like, I go to Port Dalhousie sometimes and I walk around, there's kind of no public signage, or doesn't seem to be, you can't really tell what's public in some of those areas. So were you aware?
Yes, I was. I was aware for a very long time. I can tell you a quick little story. We only moved to Port Dalhousie, but we lived on 3rd Street Louth, which is not a far distance away. My adult sons that are now in their mid-30s used to be Cubs at the first Port Dalhousie Boy Scout in the Lions Center, and I actually used to be a leader. Anyway, we used to march our Cubs down that area in the 1990s in September when it was too warm to be in the Cub Hall, and these guys needed exercise. We'd take them down there. They'd throw rocks into the lake and have a great time. So yeah, I did know about this area a long time prior to.
Okay, that's great. It was a neat story, and I'm sorry that the shore protection had to happen. I guess it was completely necessary, but I understand the loss and the devastation to lose a beautiful beach like that. But it was a measure we had to take. So thank you for coming to council and presenting.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions or comments, thank you, Mr. McCurry, for your presentation. Can I get a motion to receive the delegation from Mr. McCurry? Councillor Garcia, and a seconder, Councillor Williamson. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. So moving the motion regarding the replacement of the Mayfield Avenue stairs for lake access, I have Councillor Garcia, and seconding the motion, I have Councillor Williamson. Just a hand confirmation that I'm correct on that one. Wonderful. So motion 9.2 will be up on the screen. And I will look to Councillor Garcia to introduce the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully my colleagues have read it, but it's not that long, and because not everybody's familiar, I'll just read it quickly. So in 2020, Council approved a shoreline rehabilitation project on the city-owned lakefront on Lake Ontario and the Abbey Mews Considine area due to a collapsing bank. Whereas because the shoreline project was considered an emergency, staff were unable to prevent, were unable to prevent the closing of the stairs and lake access at Mayfield Avenue, and whereas the closed metal stairs and its wooden predecessors have provided lake access for residents from Port Lucie and elsewhere in the city for at least 60 years or so, as Mr. McCurry said. Whereas council received numerous objective emails back when the closing of the stairs was announced, and whereas at July 13, 2020 meeting, council passed my motion that staff be directed to review and recommend future potential features to the new shoreline protection that will reinstate public access to Lake Ontario, and that staff be directed to include funds in the draft 2021 operating budget to identify potential alternatives and the associated cost. And whereas the shoreline rehabilitation is now complete and the study conducted as a result of the above motion has just been completed, and it identifies what is required to restore proper access and provides a cost estimate. Therefore, be it resolved that funds for replacing the public stairs access to Lake Ontario at or near Mayfield Avenue, which was removed early this year as part of a shoreline protection project, be included in the draft 2022 capital budget for consideration of future approval. And I'd like to speak to it, Mr. Chair, but I will wait to see if any other councilors want to speak and speak last.
Okay, Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to refer this to staff and also to the accessibility committee, referring it to staff so that it can actually be itemized and part of capital project priorities, like in a list. There's no real costs associated with it. There's a couple of different locations, and we can't approve something without information. So, and the accessibility committee for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a motion to refer. That's non-debatable. So,
sorry, Mr. Chair, can I add something? I just want to hear what Councilor Porter had to say. So, if we refer it to staff, you would want him to look at the different location alternatives as well. Is that what you're saying?
No, I just heard we're approving. I'm not sure what we're approving at this point because there's been a couple of different locations proposed, and it's not. We don't have a report. We don't have any real. We have a guesstimate.
So, am I correct in assuming that the request is for the costing information to be able to know what the total cost would be? And
absolutely, and as part of just our regular budget procedures here, this is just trying to approve something before we actually dig into the budget in its entirety. Before doing that, and I think it needs to be considered with everything else in fairness. That's what I'm asking.
So, may I just add that Director Martuccio does have some more detailed cost estimates that are not included here, but he has come up with since. I don't know if that would help or not if he shows that.
I would suggest then we probably need that as a part of the report that Councillor Porter is asking for. Okay, so a referral motion is non-debatable.
Just can I ask a point of clarification?
Sure.
If staff can answer this tonight, I mean, Councillor Garcia refers to a study that's been completed. Do we need to send it back?
Well, I think part of the referral, as Councillor Porter just stated, was that she wanted to be able to consider this with respect to the entirety of the capital budget.
And the Accessibility Committee.
And the Accessibility Committee. So and I see Councillor Williamson, I'm assuming for clarification as well, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that this is not new infrastructure, so it should be put on a list of priorities of new infrastructures. This is replacing something that was existing and basically promised to the residents.
Okay, so that's noted. So we have a request for a referral.
And how soon, Councilor Porter, would that come back?
I would assume as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. We're just starting budget deliberations, so it needs to be considered with every other capital request, so.
Okay, so there is a timeline and staff's aware of the timeline with respect to the capital budget. And the expectation is that it'll come back to be a part of the budget deliberations. Okay? Okay, so non-debatable. We've got a bit of debate, but non-debatable. All those in favor of the referral? So counting.
Can I ask every counselor that's on video to or online to either turn their video on, or we would do a recorded vote?
I believe all of the councillors who are online do have their video on.
Apologies then.
Okay, so. Can we vote all those in favor of the referral, hand up?
And that's 5 out of 9, so that is a majority.
Okay, so that'll be referred and it will come back and will be a part of the deliberations for the capital budget. Okay, moving back then to item 8.2, which is financial management services and the director. It's draft 2022 city departmental expenditure and non-tax revenue budget parking meter reserve update. And before we discuss the report, we will receive presentations from city staff. So I will call on various members of the senior leadership team, I'm assuming starting with Ms. Douglas, to make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chair, councillors, and citizens. Tonight, city staff are pleased to present the city's 2022 draft operating budget. Next slide, please. You have seen this timeline before and are aware that the operating budget process is almost a year-round process. The 2022 operating budget presents the 5th operating budget that has been prepared and presented to council before the budget year begins. Next slide. 2021 was similar to 2020 in that, addition to staff preparing the 2022 operating budget, they were also busy preparing financial updates and reforecasts for council, as well as completing the safe restart reporting for the province as part of the funding requirement related to COVID-19 and its impact on the city's operating, parking, and water and wastewater budgets. Next slide, please. Here is a quick snapshot of the city departmental expenditures and non-tax revenues for 2022, which totaled just under $94 million. City departmental expenditures, including debt repayments, are increasing $5.12 million, and non-tax revenues will be increasing by just under $1 million, which results in city total net expenditure increase for 2020 of $4.27 million before considering the effect of agency boards and commissions. Next slide, please. Shown here is how the city's total expenditures for 2020 of $105 million supporting the various services provided by the city, such as fire protection, roads, walkways, parks, cemeteries, arenas, planning and building, and economic development are allocated. Next slide, please. The city provides hundreds of services to our citizens that are important to all different members of our community. As shown here, the city's base budget is increasing by less than 1%. Council initiatives have an impact of another 1%. The largest green section of the bar graph relates to non-discretionary item changes at 2.35%. This brings the 2022 increase to 4.31%, which makes achieving budget guidance of 1.3 or 2.3 extremely challenging. There are other pressures on the 2022 operating budget to getting back to pre-pandemic levels and other discretionary items that equal another 0.45%. The total cost less non-tax revenues to maintain city services in 2020 is $93.9 million. The city continues to be impacted by the global pandemic, and similar to 2021, a number of strategic mitigation measures were implemented to reduce the 2022 budget. Let's take a little closer look at these items. Next slide, please. As shown here, the strategic mitigation measures instituted to reduce the 2022 operating budget increase can be grouped into 4 categories. These categories help to improve the 2022 budget position. However, they do impose significant increases in future years. There is some risk that is accepted with these deferrals and reductions. When projects are deferred and budgets are reduced, the capacity does not exist to complete other initiatives within departmental work plans or to achieve other corporate objectives. Staff are also working on the COVID-19 financial recovery plan, which is a longer-term and multi-year strategy to address the financial implications that COVID-19 has had on city operations and functions. The focus of this recovery plan will be attempting to balance the expectations of both council, the community, and the infrastructure and service level needs across the corporation and our city. Next slide, please. Under budget deferrals, there are 2 categories. The first we will look at is deferred budget increases, which can be further grouped into 3 main categories, with the largest being capital infrastructure investments at $2.31 million, which includes contributions to reserves for development charge grants, community improvement program, the municipal works equipment, and building improvement reserves. As discussed during the capital budget presentation this evening, a reduction in the tax levy support for capital projects was also utilized as a mitigation measure similar to 2021. Infrastructure maintenance deferrals equal $80,000 and relate to park tree maintenance, street lighting improvements, and catch basin cleaning. And under corporate support, another $60,000 in budget increases were deferred. Next slide, please. Under deferred projects and initiatives, there are 4 items listed here that staff are recommending to be deferred to later in 2022 or to a future year. Manager of Budgets Lucia Chen will now review how reserves were used as a strategic mitigation measure in the 2022 operating budget. Lucia?
Thank you, Christine. Next slide, please. Similar to the 2021 budget process, this mitigation measure has been incorporated in the 2022 budget by utilizing the city's reserves to fund one-time, non-recurring, and capital support items to alleviate budget pressures. These reserves are tax rate stabilization reserve, civil project fund, building code reserve, parking meter reserve fund, and community improvement plan reserve. The total amount of reserves utilized in the 2022 operating budget is $2.57 million. Next slide, please. Considering the opening of the new Canada Summer Games Park and the closure of the Garden City Arena in 2022, net operating cost savings have been identified and incorporated in the 2022 budget. Through the review of the current year financials, staff identified opportunities to advance several minor facility improvement projects that were initially on the 2022 work plan and yet can be completed in 2021 by utilizing current year available budget. After reviewing the city's RAT rebate program, staff have determined that the program is ineffective and should be terminated in 2022. More details can be found in Appendix 2 of the Operating Budget Report, memo from Director of Planning and Building Services. The total amount of budget mitigation from project advancements and program change is at $579,000. Next slide, please. Several discretionary costs have been reduced, such as training, conferences, advertising, repairs, and utilities. The total budget reduction amount is $950,000. These reductions are temporary in nature due to the continued impact of COVID-19 expected in 2022, and they need to be brought to appropriate levels in future year budgets. Next, please. Now let's take a look at the revenues. In the draft 2022 budget, the total non-tax revenues are budgeted at $11.08 million. 50% of these revenues are from investment income, 18% is from funding from other government organizations, 18% is from penalties and interest, 13% from other revenues such as POA revenue and rents, and 1% is from other taxation, including supplemental taxes and payment in lieu revenues. Overall, the non-tax revenues have increased by $850,000 or 8.28% from the 2021 budget. Next, please. As indicated in the 2022 operating budget report, the city has experienced some successes, but also is facing some challenges as the city continues to move along our road to recovery from the global pandemic. Next, members of the senior leadership team will provide more details on the 2022 budget pressures. I will pass it over to Director of Municipal Works, Daryl Smith.
Thank you, Lucia. Every budget year presents its own sets of challenges and pressures, and 2022 is no different. Even as we target recovery, the pandemic continues to strain not only the city budget, but provincial and federal budgets as well. As we mentioned earlier, the city's base budget increase is less than 1%. The impact of non-discretionary items such as insurance increases, debt repayments, legislative compliance, revenue reductions, and health and safety items is an additional 2.35%. Council initiatives equate to another 1%, and getting back to pre-pandemic levels and other discretionary items equal about 0.45%. This results in an increase in the 2022 operating budget of $4.27 million. Director Kate will now share some more details about the council initiatives and projects in 2022.
Thank you, Daryl. There are a number of initiatives and projects that have been approved by council over the past year that impact the 2022 operating budget. The short-term rental licensing program comes into effect in Q1. This includes a new online licensing registration process, a non-parking administrative monetary penalty system, the amalgamation of bylaw enforcement and municipal licensing functions, and new bylaw enforcement and licensing staff and related supports. There will be increased workload for the city's bylaw enforcement, licensing, and administration functions as these work plans are implemented and entrenched into the PBS department. The 2022 budget year represents the first full year for the new Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The work plan here includes working with the anti-racism and LGBTQ2S committees and working with all members of SLT and their respective business areas in removing systemic barriers. In September, Council approved the reintroduction of development charges after a 12-year pause. The addition of a development financial specialist was also approved, which is a key role in supporting the administration of the financial aspect of development applications and the financial and legislative requirements of the Development Charges Act and the city's Development Charges bylaw. The city will continue its path in becoming a certified living wage employer by the end of 2024. As such, the 2022 budget year incorporates the first of a three-phase approach in implementing living wages for city employees. The city will also continue its partnership with the region to support the Niagara Assertive Street Outreach Program, an important regional and community safety initiative. While the opioid crisis, mental health, and social services do not fall within the jurisdiction of local municipalities, the city has continued to expend considerable resources in this area. This is over and above the core services and programs delivered by the municipality, which further stretches our limited resources. Finally, there is an increase in the 2022 operating budget to recognize recent usage of the Integrity Commissioner services. The Director of Economic Development, Tourism and Government Relations will now discuss non-discretionary impacts on next year's operating budget.
Next slide, please. Non-discretionary changes of $2.11 million have the biggest impact on the 2022 operating budget, making it challenging to present a budget within guidance. Non-discretionary increases are increases for budget items that we cannot directly control. Significant pressure areas include insurance. The city continues to experience premium increases and changes to program coverage, primarily caused by a hard insurance market. That's when there is a high demand for insurance and a lower supply of coverage available, coupled with the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. Utility and service contracts continue to exert pressure on the budget due to inflation and market rate increases. Commodities such as electricity, water, and fuel, as well as service contracts, continue to be less predictable elements of the budget. Debt repayment is also a pressure point. As the city continues to address its infrastructure gap with infrastructure renewal, the amount required to pay for these items are added to the operating budget in the form of debt repayments. The council-approved debt management strategy provides guidance to ensure that these infrastructure projects remain affordable for the city and its taxpayers. Health and safety, the city continues to invest in the health and safety of residents' employees. For example, the installation and maintenance of pedestrian crossovers, the continued costs associated with the pandemic all contribute to the ongoing expenses. Revenue reductions. Government grants and subsidies from programs such as the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund continue to decline, and given the current state of the economy, there has also been a significant downturn in partnership advertising revenues. Finally, there remains a cost of being legislatively compliant, such as investing in bunker gear replacement for firefighters, software for excess soil tracking, and pavement marking maintenance. Fire Chief McCormick will now share details of moving back to pre-pandemic levels. Chief.
Thank you, Brian. The proposed 2022 operating budget contains increases that are meant to return funding levels to what was in place prior to the pandemic, and also includes other necessary discretionary funding changes. Recommended increases are contained in the following areas: infrastructure for roads, facility repair, and sidewalks; staff training, including conferences and conventions, leadership training, firefighter training, and skills development; the building improvement reserve; corporate support with regards to escalating legal and court costs; equipment in the areas of rentals and small tool replacements. Council needs to be aware that while there are year-over-year increases in the 2022 budget, in a number of cases, these increases still do not reflect the funding levels that were contained in the 2020 pre-pandemic budget. The return to previous budget levels are being phased in over multiple years to mitigate the immediate budget increase. I will now turn the presentation over to CAO Oakes for his additional comments.
Chief. As we look ahead and building on some of the comments I made earlier, there are a number of areas that we need to look at and continue to build on success, best practices, as well as facing new challenges. So I'm just going to go through these briefly to give council an overview. So in terms of employee staffing levels, as we know, municipalities are service organizations that rely heavily on human resources to deliver the range and quality of services the residents have come to expect. A significant risk to the corporation is the attraction and retention of talent. The following realities create a bit of a labor market and workforce risk for not only St. Catharines, but all municipalities. In particular, for the city, we have increasing numbers of staff eligible to retire, the ability of to hire qualified candidates, and a compensation system that requires updating to be more competitive in the marketplace. One of the things that we're trying to do as an SLT is constantly review the current staffing model, and we will continue to do so in future years as we address the evolving needs of the corporation. One of the ways that the city is looking to partially mitigate this is to move to a hybrid workforce post-COVID-19. And building on some of the questions that Councillor Littleton had provided, we're looking at all of those items, including staff accommodations and buildings as part of that review. In addition to looking at that program, staff have also, over the last 2 years, been dealing with added responsibilities regarding the pandemic, juggling increased workloads. We start to run the risk that the priorities are not getting the attention they deserve, resulting in staff burnout and a possibly and potentially unhealthy work environment. We need council to understand these pressures and work with us to ensure that our human resource side of the equation is continued to be supported. With regards to the living wage employer, the city will continue its path in becoming a certified living wage employer by the end of 2024. Each year, staff review this, the living wage increase, the current wage structure, the impacted employee groups, and adjust the city's wage increase plan moving forward. Once certified, the living wage will remain an ongoing financial pressure as the city maintains the annualized living wage level. With regards to OMERS, effective January 1st, 2023, OMERS is implementing the an expansion for non-full-time employees, which essentially would allow non-full-time employees the opportunity to join the plan at any time. This will add financial pressure to the cities, to the municipality as an OMERS employer, matching those contributions. Evolving technology, the city has operated with many outdated systems, as we've identified in previous reports, that are inefficient, tend to slow down our productivity and cause delays in how we operate. It's also restricted the availability of online resources and programs. We've identified many of these innovations and are currently looking to improve those through the PeopleStop program, as we've discussed previously, as well as the property tax system. The asset management plan was endorsed recently by council, which provides the strategic guide for our core asset investment. The 2022 capital budget includes amounts that are in line with the anticipated annual funding included within the asset management plan. With regards to fleet replacement, the current fleet reserve has an insufficient funding, which creates volatility year to year as we review and replace and modernize our fleet. Moving forward, the annual contribution to the reserve, which is funded by tax, is required to be increased to ensure that the reserve is sustainable while creating a stable funding source for future fleet purchases. Reserve uses, we have reserves and reserve funds are an important component of our future planning and financial sustainability. In both 2021 and again in 2022, reserves are being utilized to fund one-time budget items while also helping to mitigate increases in the tax rate. This approach is not sustainable and will cause significant budget increases in future years as the reserve balances decrease. And this is why we're looking at a longer-term fiscal and financial plan to recover from COVID. With regards to the beach strategy, as more people have discovered our local beaches, there have been a need to continue to invest in security and maintenance. This has also generated additional parking revenues to the city. And we're hoping as we move forward through 2022 and beyond, some of the expenses can be reduced as we start to normalize operations within the beaches. With regards to the opioid crisis, the city continues to work collaboratively with the region and the NASO program to address both the opioid crisis, mental health, and homelessness. There are programs that we're looking at. We're dealing and meeting with our staff on a weekly basis to address some of the issues, specifically with the substance abuse and opioid crisis within the downtown. Finally, the budget items that have been deferred in the 2022 budget will need to return in future years, as indicated by the chief. This will require a multi-year COVID financial recovery plan. Staff are currently working to develop the plan, and details will come forward to council at a future budget. I'll now pass it back over to Christine Douglas.
Thanks, Dave. The Engage STC online engagement platform tool, next slide please, will again be used in 2022 as an ongoing opportunity for residents to learn more about the budget and see how familiar citizens are with the budget process, and a forum for them to share their ideas, as well as a chance for residents to ask questions and share their feedback as the budget evolves. To check out this platform, you can visit www.engagestc.ca/budget. Next slide, please. COVID has also impacted the way we engage with the public. It is great that we have had experience with the telephone town hall as a way for the city to reach out to 30,000 residents in one night. Next Tuesday, October 26th, as the chair has indicated, will be the city's 8th telephone town hall. There will also be 2 virtual open houses held next week on Monday and Wednesday, which residents can pre-register for through the city's Engage STC webpage. And on Monday, December 13th, a public meeting will be held prior to council's deliberation of the 2022 operating budget. Next slide. In addition to the telephone town hall and public meetings over the next couple of months, there are a number of council meetings for 2022 budget discussions, as they are held at 6 p.m. in council chambers and virtually via the Zoom platform. All council meetings are live streamed through YouTube. The 2022 operating budget is anticipated to be tabled with the November 29th council agenda for council deliberations on December 13th. Next slide, please. So to recap, the 2022 proposed operating budget will increase by $4.27 million, or 4.76% from 2021. The city's base budget is increasing by less than 1%. Council initiatives have an impact of another 1%. The most significant increase is the non-discretionary items at 2.35, which includes debt repayments and insurance costs. There are other pressures on the 2022 budget related to getting back to pre-pandemic and other discretionary items that equals 0.45. This all results in net expenditures to maintain city services in 2022 at $93.9 million. Next slide. The city's budget helps to shape the future of our city. Stay in touch by visiting the budget page of the city's website or engage stc.ca/2022 budget, or by sending us an email at budget@stcatharines.ca. You may also connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, or by giving us a call by phone. Mr. Chair, departmental staff members are here to address any questions council may have at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Douglas. I will say I'm a little disappointed at the lack of trees and tree imagery. We've had trees all over our budgets the last several years. I'm a bit disappointed it's missing in this one. I will ask for a motion to receive the staff presentation. Councillor Littleton, seconded by Councillor Porter. And if we can vote on that to receive the presentations from city staff regarding the draft 2022 city departmental expenditure and non-tax revenue budget parking meter reserve update. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions in a moment when we get to the main motion with respect to the report. All those in favor of receiving the presentations? That is carried. Anyone opposed? Seeing none. All right, so are there any members who wish to move the staff recommendation as contained in the report? Anybody who'd like to make the staff recommendation? Councillor Miller, wonderful. And a seconder, Councillor Williamson. Thank you so much. So we have the staff recommendation on the screen that the presentation and the information contained in the report and the draft budget be received for information purposes. The council support the proposed strategy for the annual increases to the provision to the Consolidated Municipal Works Vehicle and Equipment Reserve from 2023 to 2027 as indicated in this report, and these increases be reviewed annually with the draft operating budget. So with that, are there any questions, comments, concerns, queries, confabulations to be had? Councillor Porter?
I'll go first at the risk that I'm going to think of a million other things when other people are talking, but I guess I'll start. The 0.97% base budget increase. Am I correct in assuming it's not really keeping up with the collective agreements that we have in place with the city? Like the rates, the collective agreements, the yearly increases I think are more than this, are they not?
Through the chair to the councillor, with regards to the base budget, what that indicates by the base budget increasing by less than the 1% is that other items within the budget have been reduced in order to achieve a base budget that is less than that. There are increases in the 2022 operating budget that would meet the city's wage requirements and negotiated contracts. We do have 2 of our wage contracts that we will be negotiating with the union groups, the QP 157 and 150. Those agreements end at the end of 2021. So there are provisions included in this operating budget for those potential increases as well.
For clarity, Ms. Douglas, so that base budget increase allows us to continue doing what we have done previously with a 0.97% increase. That's the way the general public should read that. That increase allows us to maintain services at the level they were at?
Through the chair, that would be correct.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time believing that, but okay.
Our staff have sharpened their pencils, Councillor, and they have sharpened their pencils well this year, as they do every year.
Okay. My next question, The administrative and monetary penalties for non-parking enforcement, we're going to expand that this year, and hopefully we'll see some, like, expanding that means costs, I think. It's administrative costs, but hopefully also some revenues, or avoiding some issues related to bylaw enforcement that need to go to provincial offenses of court, so that might actually save us money in the long run. Can the staff describe what they're going to expand the, I don't know if you call it AMPS, but the administrative and monetary penalty system? Like, what else are we going to expand it to? We're introducing it for short-term rentals, but I think there are a lot of other areas where we could use this. I think this is a question through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Kitte.
Correct. Thank you. And through the chair to the councillor, you're right. The AMP system will be initially set up to accommodate the new short-term rental licensing program. After that time, bylaw enforcement and municipal licensing staff will be prioritizing other bylaws to be reviewed, modernized, approved by council, so that they can also be subject to the AMPS system. And that way we are moving from having to go through a Part 3 approach, where we have to take every single offense to provincial offenses court, and we're moving towards Part 1 offenses, where we can start issuing tickets and generating that revenue back to the municipality, as opposed to having it go through the court system.
Okay, that's actually an exciting development, to be honest. My next question through you, Mr. Chair, is I think either directed to Director Kitte or to Mr. York. And when we did all of the work on short-term rentals, there was an end goal to put in place a municipal accommodations tax, but I don't see where that project is at this moment. I know COVID has had an effect on the hotels and motels, but short-term rentals are still going like gangbusters. And we were, I think, hoping to have something in place before the Canada Summer Games in 2022. Is that still on the table?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the goal here is to implement a program 2022 Q2. So just prior to the games, we needed the bylaw in place to so that we're enforcing both at the hotel level and at the short-term rental level. So a level of fairness, if you will.
Okay, thank you. This probably could have been an email, but I'm going to ask it right now. When we first got on council in this term, we had to approve cannabis stores, and it was a big deal, and we were supposed to get some money from the province to help with bylaw enforcement. I guess this is a question to maybe Ms. Douglas, through you, Mr. Chair. Did we ever get this promised funding from the province for bylaw enforcement? I don't see it in here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, with regards to the cannabis funding from the province, the city has received some dollars, and we have used it for some policy work with regards to cannabis legislation here within the municipality. I don't have the particulars, but we can provide that information to council, what we did receive and how those dollars have been used.
Okay, thank you. I think it doesn't sound like it's very much then, or maybe less than expected. Those are my questions. Insurance. I don't have a question on that. I guess I just have a complaint. That's all. Thank you.
If you'd like to give voice to that complaint, I'm sure it's shared by every other member of council and senior leadership team, but.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Other questions, comments at this time? As a reminder to my colleagues, we do have several meetings where this particular topic will come up. We also have a number of presentations. So if you do think of something after the fact, there is still plenty of time to ask those questions. And as I had mentioned, my hope is that any potential amendments to the operating budget do come forward at a later date after we have heard our presentations and are able to deal with the operating budget holistically. Councillor Miller, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just, I see that the civic celebrations I earlier referred to is in the table regarding the Civic Project Fund. And my specific question was, there's $6,000 allotted, I think, for the Lions Club, and I believe that's around Labor Day and around the fireworks. And I see we budgeted that in 2021. Did we use that money? Give that money in 2021?
Through the chair to the councillor, those dollars that were allocated for those celebrations in 2021, as those celebrations didn't occur in the same way, those dollars were not advanced to those organizations in the 2021 budget year. Therefore, the Civic Project Fund was not reduced as they were funded by that source.
Okay. I guess I'm curious. We could, if we basically skipped a year, if we could double the 2022, because we saved that money last year, and I know both those organizations are pretty hard up because they rely on donations, and donations across the board have gone down. So I'm wondering if that's an option for us that we could presumably vote on as council.
Through the chair to the councillor, the civic celebration items for these, the Lions Club of Meriton and Port Dalhousie, are funded by the Civic Project Fund. The Civic Project Fund is a funding source that we utilized in 2021 to help assist with some of our COVID pressures, and we're using it again in 2022 to help offset our the pressures in our operating budget. In 2021, there was $2.674 million that was removed from the Civic Project Fund in order to support the operating budget. Staff have been reviewing that and looking at what needs were used, and this would be a situation where the Civic Project Fund wasn't required. And as we move forward with developing the 2022 budget, we made some recommendations for the usage of the Civic Project Fund based on the fact that it wasn't utilized as fully in 2021. I think ultimately the usage of reserves is a decision of council for it to make. And that it would be a decision for council to use it in this way. I think it might be beneficial to look at the financial recovery plan that staff is putting together to see, how our reserves have been impacted. I would also like to, point out to the councillor that earlier this year, the staff did bring forward a policy with regards to the usage of the Civic Project Fund reserve, and that that would begin in the 2023 year, and that was looking at reducing the reliance on the Civic Project Fund to support the tax levy budget, as well as limiting its usage. So any dollars that are used in this year, again, it is at the decision of council, but I think we need to take a cautious and balanced approach with regards to how we use the Civic Project Fund to support the 2022 operating budget.
Yeah, I think I appreciate those comments, but I guess my counterpoint to that, not that we're going to make a decision tonight, is that the Civic Project Fund, I think, is more specifically for civic projects and is not supposed to be a sort of stabilization fund. And I know that's what you're saying and what we're trying to move towards, but I think supporting civic projects, whether they're our own or from service clubs or the community, is really the intent of the Civic Project Fund, in my opinion. So I think maybe it's something for me to reach out to those service clubs and see what their budget pressures are, because obviously, speaking of the impacts of COVID, they felt that as well. But I will put a pin in that one, I suppose, for now. My next question is just about the deferred projects. Specifically, I guess I was concerned. I realize it's just for half a year that we're deferring the hiring of one of the bylaw officers. As I think everyone knows, that is a frequent complaint to councillors with regards to the speed with which bylaws are investigated and how frequently parking issues, especially outside the downtown core, are investigated. So I guess to staff, is the thinking that having them for the second half of the year, is that a time, is the second half busier in terms of bylaw complaints, et cetera, than the first half?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll begin, and perhaps Director Kate will have some additional comments. With regards to deferring the hiring of one bylaw enforcement officer related to the short-term rental till mid-year, is that we are going to be just starting with the implementation of the short-term rental program at the beginning of 2022, and it will take some time in order for us to get the administration part of the registration system up and going, and we do know that the summer months is a busier time for short-term rentals in our city. With regards to parking enforcement, these bylaw officers deal with municipal property matters, and they are not the parking officers. The parking bylaw officers are under contract with the city and not under the same particular budget item. If you do have concerns with regards to the parking services, please reach out, send me an email, and we will make sure that any, your concerns are addressed if they're not being addressed in a timely manner.
Okay, that's good to hear. So there's the existing bylaw officers are not going to have additional work because they're specifically tied to the new short-term rental. So that makes sense. And then just the only other deferred project that really stood out was the sport field strategy. Through the chair to staff, what's the impact of delaying it, and what's the intent of that sport field strategy? I just noticed we have a lot of different recreation and parks strategies going on. So what was the purpose of this one specifically?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, so the sports field strategy first came to council in May of 2020. So just as kind of COVID was starting. So when we looked at it at that time, sports field strategy was deferred until the uncertainty of COVID was a little bit more known. In kind of conjunction with that, the Pick Leeson Park was deferred to the 2022 capital budget deliberations, and so that is included in the draft budget. And so really this is very similar to arena strategy, aquatic strategy, kind of those recent strategies, and really there's significant health and safety concerns with our ball diamonds, and so we'll be looking kind of as a fulsome portfolio of all the ball diamonds, and to really look at where we're going in the future, and we'll continue to look at things like asset condition and usage.
So I guess, is it possible or will this be sort of amended or an addendum to the recreation master plan? Like, how do those, or the recreation facilities plan? Because these, the sport fields to me seem like recreation facilities.
Through the chair to the councillor, exactly. So this will support the recreation master plan. So this comes from the recommendations within the recreation master plan. And again, very similar to the arena strategy and the aquatics facility strategy. So they'll complement each other. And I might add as well, the recreation master plan advisory committee will be involved in this from day one, looking at the scope of the project as well as the community consultations.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And that's all for me, Mr. Chair. I have my own pencils to sharpen between now and our future meetings for sure.
We wait with bated breath, Councillor. Bated breath. Any other questions or comments related to the report this evening? Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Talking about, about baiting, I have a concern about eliminating the, I have allergies, the rat rebate program. I was looking at the report that Director Kite had, and I know the number of applications has dropped down quite a bit from when we first started this, but I also note that in 2021 year to date, we have significantly more applications received than we had in all of 2020. So I would prefer, instead of eliminating it altogether, because we still get complaints about rats, I think my other fellow councilors would as well. I hate to feel that we don't have a program that residents can relate to or apply to. What I would like to do, and I can make a motion to that effect, but I'll wait to see if other councilors have comments, to at least keep it at, let's say, 10,000 for 2022, and that planning and building services, since they say the program is not particularly efficient, that as part of the budget process, that they give us the recommendations as to any changes or streamlining that we should consider to make it more efficient. So that's my comment on that. So if I'll wait to see if anybody else has a comment before I make another comment on anybody else. Okay.
Councillor Phillips?
I agree. Same. I mean, I've had numerous complaints about rat infestations and have directed them towards the city and had replies thanking me for it. So if it needs to be reduced, I mean, we're talking about $100 million budget here, and here it's $20,000. So if we're going to cut it $10,000 to still have something in place to see how it goes, and if it's not used again, and the recommendation is there, then so be it, we discontinue it. But I think we should give it a chance for another year.
Okay, Councillor, I would suggest then if you can forward that through to Ms. Douglas as a part of potential revisions. We're going to start that list immediately, so that would be appreciated.
Okay. My other comment relates to the budget in general. I'm concerned about the 5.13 increase in expenditures. I know I go through this every year, but I realize that the city has, and all its departments have significant pressures because of COVID, and I recognize that, but I think we also need to recognize the flip side of the equation, and that is all of our residents out there are having significant pressures, and pressures that will affect their ability to pay increased taxes or current taxes. So I would certainly have trouble supporting that sizable an increase. I know we're not going to decide that today, but I hope that, I know that the CAO said we've brought it down already, but I believe that we should try to bring it down more in line with the guidance that the Budget Committee gave to the different departments. And that's my comment, Mr. Chair.
I do appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Garcia. The one thing that I will draw attention to, and Councillor Garcia raised, I think he raises valid points with concern about capacity of our residents. And I know in my conversations with Ms. Douglas and the rest of the senior leadership team, I've echoed the same concerns. But, and I will just draw attention to those who are looking at home, page 2 of the actual budget book, which I believe is page 23 of our report this evening, lists the base budget change, which, you know, on the one hand, we do have Councillor Porter who said she's amazed and questioning the 0.97% increase to the base budget, and I give kudos to our staff for being able to achieve that. But when you take that 0.97, you look at the almost 1 full percentage point that's simply from council initiatives, and it speaks to that old saying that we can wait for budget night, but the reality is every council night is budget night, and we have made decisions which will have an impact on next year's budget. And then we look at the non-discretionary changes, and going through that list, I don't know if there is anything there that we can actually cut. That brings us to almost 4.5% as an increase right off the hop. So those are 3 items, one which is simply the base budget delivering last year's services, the decisions the council has made over the last 10 months, and non-discretionary changes in many cases that are being handed down from other levels of government. I would challenge all of us. I make the joke every year about sharpening our pencils, and I do appreciate that Councillor Miller will be getting his pencil case out. But this will be a very difficult year, and we knew that because COVID, but also because of other changes, and also because of other decisions that this council has made. And I will give credit to staff, knowing full well what the financial ramifications are. So I strongly encourage my colleagues over the next several weeks, let's turn everything over and let's examine everything, but let's make sure that we are making decisions that are truly in the best interest of our community. Because some of these items, if we don't move forward with them, I think that there's a cost associated with that. And some of these are costs we have already decided were worth it. So I will leave it at that. I see no other comments or questions. As I have said, if councillors do have potential revisions that they'd like to see made, if they have comments or questions, I would encourage them to email Ms. Douglas. Feel free to copy me if you would like. I'm going to ask as a direction to staff that the questions and the revisions be made available to councillors to see in advance of meetings, because it is possible that many of us will have similar questions. Someone will ask it first, and rather than wasting staff time having to respond multiple times over the weeks, having that list there would be helpful, I think. So if there are no other comments or questions, we do have a motion on the floor. Did we have a mover and a seconder for that? We did? Wonderful. I will look to the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Miller?
Yes.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Porter?
Yes.
Councillor Cisco?
Yes.
Councillor Williamson?
Yes.
Mayor Senzik?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge?
Yes.
Councillor Garcia?
Yes.
Councillor Littleton?
Yes.
And that's carried.
All right, so we're moving on to item 9.1, the multi-year fiscal plan. This is a motion from Councillor Littleton. And can I have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Phillips. Councillor Littleton, I'll let you speak to this.
Sorry, I apologize for this. I'm gonna read it out. So whereas the CAO in his verbal report at the October 6th council meeting indicated that the city continues to incur additional expenditures related to COVID recovery, and whereas this puts a strain on the municipal finances, and whereas there's been no additional provincial or federal support being announced for municipalities in Ontario, and whereas the effects of the global pandemic and future waves creates uncertainty around the city's recovery, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to develop a multi-year fiscal plan to be included in the 2022 budget deliberations. And just really quickly, having a multi-year plan, even though it doesn't have to be right to the dollar, gives us maybe even a sense of hope. We can start looking ahead at the recovery, and maybe some of these projects that are going to get pushed off, we're going to see where they're going to come back. And so I think having that multi-year plan is great. And just another word that's in there, it's very frustrating to sit in all of the budget meetings all year long and to see these expenses coming time and time again, and having things downloaded on us, and insurance costs going up, and now there's this regulation and the OMERS, and all of these things keep coming on the backs of municipalities, and it just is very difficult to put forward, as Chair Cisco said, a budget that doesn't have an increase, and it is extremely frustrating, and I'm kind of going on the other side here, and I apologize, but it's time for the province and the federal governments to start funding more to municipalities, especially with the COVID. So I'm just throwing that in there. It's a little bit of a tangent, but this is the motion for the multi-year budgeting. Thank you.
All right, any questions or comments? I think this is something that all of us agree is a necessity, so I appreciate Councillor Littleton for bringing it forward, and I know the CAO has been working on something along these lines, so I expect that this will be able to come back very quickly. So, seeing no questions or comments, I will look to the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Littleton?
Yes.
Councillor Garcia?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge?
Yes.
Councillor Miller?
Yes.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Porter?
Yes.
Councillor Williamson? We'll move on to Mayor Senzik.
He's got a check mark.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williamson, are you there? Okay. And Chair Cisco?
Yes.
That's carried.
In the region, at the Zoom meetings, they vote with the check mark, so I think we can assume that our lone regional councillor is voting with the check mark. Item 10, call for notices of motion. These would be discussed and voted on at the next meeting. There is nothing that's been submitted. Are there any notices of motion to be made aware of? All right, seeing none, we have item 11, the report request. We have the hanging basket request from Councillor Garcia. We also have the hanging basket request from Councillor Sorrento. Those were both submitted beforehand. Before the meeting, Councillor Dodge also submitted 2 requests, which I believe, I'm going to put these all on the bus if there's no objection. So an omnibus motion to pass all of them? Councillor Porter?
I joined the party and I have a report request on hanging baskets as well. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I do.
Okay. I believe the hanging baskets in all wards is a motion. Someone else was bringing that forward as Councillor Sorrento is not here. Was it Councillor? I was informed. Councillor Porter, if you'd like to make that motion on behalf of Councillor Sorrento and take ownership of that and add to it.
Well, what I am adding to it, I did send a brief email to staff. I may have referred to them as the freaking hanging baskets, so I'm sorry about that. That the staff report back on how non-core capital and operating costs related to hanging baskets and flower planting can be included in the city's future sponsorship program to help maintain beautification efforts, improve civic engagement, and keep costs reasonable. So we are coming back with a sponsorship program. This would fit in perfectly with this. We did get some sponsorship for the hanging baskets. And since staff have sharpened their pencils, you know, we need to do the same thing.
So would this be a request as a part of that sponsorship scandal? I almost said sponsorship scandal. Wow. It's a blast from the past. Not yet. It's early entry into politics. The sponsorship report, would that be more, do you feel that should be a part of the sponsorship report?
Can I ask when the sponsorship report is coming back to council?
Don't believe it's coming back as a part of the budget. It'll be after the budget. So would you prefer that this be included? Because then if you want it included for the budget, then it should come back with Councillor Sorrento's, in which case you can take ownership of Councillor Sorrento's and add this to that.
I think sponsorship needs to be part of the discussion.
So then this,
with the hanging baskets, like everybody wants a million hanging baskets everywhere. I don't know how we're going to pay for them. We did get some sponsorship, so I would even, it might be a little bit premature, and we might decide to defer expansion maybe until we get a sponsorship if we're going to expand hanging baskets. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is I would like a report. It might not be a full report on sponsorship, but a discussion.
So separate.
Around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then can I ask you to make Councillor Sorrento's motion as well for the report? Or not? Listen,
I will do it if she does.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. All right, and thank you, Councillor Dodge. I appreciate that. We also have a staff report on the budget and resources required to catch up on the backlog of forestry-related work orders due to the cutbacks the city put in place to mitigate the financial impact of COVID. We also have staff report on the budget resources required to better address the garbage collection in parks. So unless there is a desire to separate out these reports, can we vote on them at once? Is anybody asking for, this is the point of budget, so is to ask for these reports and the information. So seeing no objections, all those in favor of these report requests? Anybody opposed? Seeing no opposed, that's carried unanimously. Closed session, there's nothing. Motion arising from closed, there's nothing. Before we adjourn, I want to remind everybody the date of the next council budget meeting is Wednesday, November the 3rd, 2021, when the board and agency budgets will be presented, at which point we will have a more full understanding of what the full cost of 2022 may be. Councilor Garcia.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a comment on that. I noticed that it is November 3rd, so I'm hoping that back to the question of the stairs, that Director Martuscia will be able to have the updated report for that one, since we said as soon as possible. And the other comment I wanted to make is regarding hanging baskets, that I've already met with staff, and I was really pleased to share with council that They found that the environmentally friendly baskets were quite successful. They did quite well. And also, I'm getting ahead of the report, but they're finding the costs are not necessarily higher. They'll comment on that because they have a much longer life than what the other ones were, more disposable, 1 year kind of thing. So
Excellent.
anyway, we'll look forward to that.
Yes. Kudos to my colleague, Councillor Porter, for her excellent suggestion of environmentally friendly hanging baskets. As a final reminder to the many multitudes who are out there in YouTube land watching right now, a reminder, stcatharines.ca/budget talk to provide public comment, budget@stcatharines.ca for emails, engagestc.ca for additional budget feedback, Monday and Wednesday next week, virtual open houses, which you can register for on the city website, and Tuesday is our wildly successful telephone town hall, which I know is always a great evening for the mayor and myself, as well as senior staff who I think enjoy it more than we do. So please stay tuned, and again, hit the stcatharines.ca/budget talk for information about those dates. With that, a motion to adjourn, there being no further business. Councillor Littleton, Councillor Phillips, all those in favor? Good night now.